This is the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Long Island Retro Gaming Podcast. Joining me today is a very fine gentleman, Dan Policar. Dan is a Grammy-nominated keyboardist, songwriter, and producer. He has worked on a ton of things and with a ton of different people, including Ellie, Gouldling, Ricky Martin, French Montana, Mystical, Andra Day, Raekwon of the Wu-Tang Clan, Pusha T, Damian Jr., Gong Marley, and many more. In addition to all of that, he is working on music for quite a few video games at this time. He is also the PC gaming coordinator for the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo.
Sure.
He's a great dude, and he has more than $20 to spend.
I don't know about that.
Welcome to the show, Dan. How you doing?
Good, man. Thank you for having me on the show. I don't know if I have more than $20, but you know.
Well, if anyone does, that's how we met, by the way. We met years ago from me selling not crazy high expensive stuff, but something more than $20.
You were selling good stuff. And I had to have the good stuff. So, you know, at the time, I think it was the Framemeister that I bought from you, right?
Yep,
and I still have it. And that at the time was really hard to get. The OSSC hadn't even been talked about yet, but you know, that is what it is. So, and not that I want to add people to mention in my intro, but I feel like we should mention Sean Paul because he's my main, I would say the main artist that I've been working for the past 8 years. And that's probably the majority of the work that I've done in music that people might know about. That's probably where they would know me from that job.
Yeah, I see that. That was in a different area of the show.
Yeah, it's kind of its own thing because there's just so much. Yeah.
I actually did not know. I've known you for years, and I didn't know a lot about what you did. And I started following you on Instagram, I don't know, a year or two ago or something.
Mm.
And I see a shot of you on stage, and then there's like a billion people in the crowd. And I think, what the hell does this guy do? This looks amazing. So it's pretty cool to learn that you're.
And it wasn't at the expo.
No
shot. Oh
no, it was not.
Okay.
No, both people at the expo were not in that show. No, I'm just kidding. So let's get right into it here. So I know that you're working on a number of games, doing the music for them. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So at the moment, it's not really that many games. It's 2 very important games. So quality over quantity, hopefully. The first game that I would think is probably going to be getting the most publicity and also the first game I was ever offered or even had an opportunity to work on as a musician in a professional capacity is called Empire of Sin. And it's being made by a game company known as Romero Games, and they are located in Galway, Ireland. And Romero Games, you might not know the name just yet because they've only been in business for a handful of years as that company, but you probably know either one of the founding partners, either John Romero or Brenda Romero. And it's the game that I'm working on, Empire of Sin, is actually really Brenda's. It's her game, you know. So she's like the lead designer. I'm sure she has her hands in way more than she wants to some days, and you know, she's the CEO of the company as well. And you have John Romero, who's doing a lot of different stuff on the game. And if you know anything about John Romero, he's kind of well known for creating this game called Doom or Wolfenstein or Commander Keen.
What are those? Never heard of those.
Heretic, Hex. The list goes on, and he's you know, a legend in the game industry. Probably one of the more well known PC game developers of ever. And Brenda is really no slouch either because she's also been working on games. I think she started in 1981 and John started in 1979. And she started at Sirtech. And if you know the game Wizardry, she started at the first Wizardry game and she worked on every Wizardry game, which is pretty awesome. And then, of course, a million other games after that. She worked on Jagged Alliance 2, I believe. She worked on. I have a few games here actually that I know she worked on. Playboy the Mansion.
Really?
Yep. I got her. Actually, that's the PS2 copy, but I have a signed copy here.
Oh, that's neat.
That she signed for me, and that was pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, she's worked on a million games. She actually, interesting story, right? So here's a little bit of crossover of my two worlds. So, probably one thinks like, well, how the hell do you meet Brenda and John and work on their game as the first game you've ever worked on in video games?
Right. How does that happen?
Yeah, it's a pretty funny, long story. Maybe we'll dive into pieces of it because I met Brenda on a Facebook chat group, which is dedicated to big box PC game collecting, which is all this stuff you see behind me. These are all big box PC games, which is my primary collecting focus, I would say. Not that I don't love console games or other stuff, but PC games were the first thing I had. I never really had a console until I was like, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 years old. So I had a lot of PC games when I was younger. And that's kind of my focus. But anyway, I'm in this chat group, which is an amazing chat group. I don't even know how I got added to the admin chat. I was just part of the group, and the Facebook group called the Big Box PC Game Collectors, right? So they added me to the admin chat, and Brenda, I think they added her a little while later, but we were just talking, whatever, and then she was inviting us to the museum, which they're going to be opening probably 2020. It just kind of depends on their game development schedule. They're opening a museum for mainly id Software, and that'll be in Ireland. So they were inviting all of us, and I said, yeah, if I'm on tour or whatever nearby, I'd love to come by. She said, sure, you're invited. And I said, if you guys happen to be anywhere near my touring schedule, you're welcome to come to one of the shows. So I sent her the summer schedule, part of the summer schedule that I knew was nearby Ireland. And we ended up having a show in Nottingham. And she's like, really? Like, you can get me tickets or whatever? I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, how many do you want? She wanted a bunch of tickets, the whole family. I said, yeah, no problem. It was in Nottingham. And so the whole family came to the show. It was great. So I had Brenda and John, their kids, and I had them on stage at Soundcheck. They got to see, we played at some arena in Nottingham. I forget the name, but it was great. So we got to play that arena. I had them as guests. They got to see a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. So it was pretty cool. And now, believe it or not, before this happened, she had already asked me if I wanted to work on her game because I had said she was advertising, right? She's the CEO, so she's partially responsible for human resources, hiring everybody. If you don't know anything about a game company, depending on the size, and your role at the company, you'll have more than one job, right? So if
small companies are like that,
right? So if you're, for instance, if you're working on Skyrim, for example, right, and your job is to design the chairs, that might be your entire job, and it's very specific because it's such a huge undertaking, AAA, gigantic studio, gigantic game, whatever. And then in a team like theirs, where they're in the 20 to 30 people neighborhood, and I know they're still hiring, Brenda's responsibilities are, I would say, magnified because now you're the lead designer on the game. So you're responsible for making it awesome or not awesome or whatever. And then you're also responsible for running a dang company.
Yeah.
So on top of that. So
like too big and too small at the same time.
Sure. And I know for a fact she's one of the hardest working, busiest people I know. But she was advertising for I forget exactly, was maybe some artists or programmers, and I have like zero art or programming skills, unless you're talking about, programming music or something like that. And then
Or
I
a
was like,
VCR.
well, or a VCR, I could do that. Some console stuff, a Frame Meister maybe occasionally. But I said, yeah, well, I can't help you with that, but if you want any help with the music or music supervision or whatever, then I can totally lend my help. Otherwise, I'll be happy to share, any job postings that I see you post and share them with whoever. And she was like, oh, well, do you want to work on my game? I was like, yeah. And at the time, it hadn't been announced.
Right.
So I didn't know really anything about it. She told me, she'd kind of asked me a couple of questions, and I did sign an NDA, so I'm not exactly sure how much of it I'm allowed to reveal, but I can reveal what's been revealed.
Right.
But the bottom line was, she asked me, yeah, do you want to do some music for this game? I said, sure. And I think, something that helped me probably, kind of seal the deal to make sure I got the job. I subtly said to myself, I said, all right, she's never really heard anything specifically that I can do. But what if I just write a little demo real quick and send it over? So write a demo, tweak it up, make it nice. I send it over. She doesn't listen to it right away or whatever. She's like, oh, what a nice surprise, whatever. She listens to it, I guess, a day or two later. And then I get a message back. Oh, we love it. This is exactly what we need. So I'm like, okay, good. This was a smart move.
Yeah, good fit all around.
Yeah, and then this is before I'd met them or whatever at the concert. I kind of told the story in the wrong order, but she messages me. She's like, yeah, so John wants to talk to you. I said, okay, sure, no problem, whatever. They send me a bunch of stuff for the music I'm supposed to, I wanted to review or whatever, listen to. So like 2-3 days later, I'm on the phone. I'm on the Skype, actually, talking to John Romero in Ireland. I mean, I've never met the guy. I'm like, wow, this is great. So we end up talking for like 90 minutes, and we talked about the game. And then we talked a lot about big box PC game collecting, because he's also a huge collector. And he's really a big fan of the early Apple II stuff. Even though you don't necessarily know him as a giant Apple II programmer, he's a huge fan of all those guys that were like kind of at the genesis of not only PC, well, like we call it PC gaming, but PC kind of refers to any computer system, whether it's Commodore, Amiga, Apple, IBM, it doesn't matter. So he's a huge collector, and I don't remember exactly how we got on the subject, but I knew that he had ported, or maybe I was asking him about it. He had ported the game Might and Magic 2 from, let's see, where did he go to? He went from Apple to Commodore 64. I believe he did the Commodore 64 port. And yeah, that's right. And he told me that he had made a special cable that he popped off one side of the thing. He made a cable to go right from the CPU of the Apple into the Commodore, because they both ran off the same chip. And I want to say it was the 6502. And I'm pretty sure. Anyway, I don't want to get too off track and into territory that I'm not such an expert on. But this cable actually, we think, is in the possession of another mutual friend of ours, who's also a big box PC game collector. And it was just a funny story. If you know anything about John Romero, he's got this like incredible memory. And so he remembers the phone call that he had with this guy 20 years ago, the time of day, the weather, all kinds of crazy stuff. And I think that's why, he probably helps that, he's got that incredible memory to, program and be kind of an exceptional, all around individual. 'Cause he's not really just a programmer. People think of him as like, I get the impression that a lot of people think of him as a level designer, but the guy did audio. He's won awards for game audio. He's done game design. yes, level design, programming naturally. I mean, he's pretty much got his hand in damn near everything. And probably back in the day, and maybe even now, marketing. God only knows. I don't know him well enough, but
Well, that's good
it's
because
unbelievable.
I think when you have your hand in multiple facets of something, you get to understand all the different parts and how they all can come and work together.
Well, so it's funny you mentioned that because as Brenda and I kind of just became friends, she started sharing all this information about game design and how games are made. She suggested articles that I read. She suggested books. I would suggest her book. Let's see, where is it? She's got two. She's got at least two books. This is one. This is Breaking into the Game Industry, and this is an awesome book to just. There's so much good stuff in there that I was like, for a total beginner like me. Let me put this back in a second. For a totally beginner like me, is in terms of game design and game development, it was like, oh, this is perfect. Like, the sad part for me in the book, the majority of the jobs don't have anything to do with what I know and what I do, but it's cool. And it's just good to be on that side of development, because it's like it was, I don't know, it's just a natural progression for me. I mean, I've been working in music for so long. I've been, a hobby with the video games, kind of obsessive hobby, if you want to call it that. I mean, I think that's why we're friends, right, Joel? Because we're obsessive in this hobby to a degree. And it's not our careers, but, for me, it's like, I don't know that there's a job, like a full-time job I would be able to take in games at the moment. And I don't know that the industry really has support for that unless you're working at a AAA studio. And at the moment where my career is at, I don't think that's going to happen. But, for me to do composition and writing music for games and contributing to them, that definitely is a possibility.
Well, I mean, gaming is a part of who we are. And it's really cool to be able to have a part in something around games.
Yeah.
And like wherever it leads, if it leads to some gigantic thing or not, just the fact that you're doing something is, I don't know, it kind of brings life all together,
Yeah. It's great. I mean, look, the expo, why am I involved with the expo in the first place? Because I just love the stuff. It has nothing, obviously it has nothing else to do with anything other than the love of it. Why did you put all this together? Why are you still doing all the work to be at the helm of this thing? I assume for the same reasons, right? You just love it. What else would you do?
I mean, I might be insane, but yes, I love it.
I never said that those two things had to be mutually exclusive. They probably go together, and I will happily admit to being insane as well. But I think that's it, man. We're gonna do it one way or the other.
Yeah. Might as well do it together,
Right. That and also, how deep can you go? How deep do you want to go, really? Because some people love to play games, and I do too. But the game development guys, it's interesting. I started thinking to myself, like, how does a game developer play a game, right? They're not playing games like you and I were playing Bubble Bobble back in, 1989.
Right.
They're not. They're just not. They're not thinking of it that way. They're thinking of like, how do we animate this? How is this thing going to work? How's this design concept going to work with this mechanic? What's the whole overall concept of the game? And I mean, we kind of take it for granted as the end user, right? But I'm now able to see it and look at it from another side. Not only see it and look at it from another side, but have people that have been there and done that, and not just people that have been there and done that, kind of like the top people that have been there and done that. I mean, if you want to program an FPS, right, first person shooter game, who would you want to talk to besides John Romero as one of your first guys? I mean, there's other guys too, but he'd be up there, right? He'd be up near the top of the list. So that's what I mean. It's like, you want to talk to John Carmack? Okay, same company. right? Same start. So
As you learn more about this too, and you, let's just say you learn more about game design, then you play a game, so you're going to start approaching it differently, which I think just gives you another level of appreciation of the game because you're seeing it from a different angle. Like, huh? I mean, as far it's kind of different, but kind of the same. When I look at games I've never seen before, older games or something, I look at it at least from an aspect. There's the way I would normally look at a game. This is fun, whatever. But then I'm always kind of looking at it like, I wonder if this would work in a group setting. Like, would this be really fun? If this is multiplayer, how many players can it support? What kind
mm-hmm.
of shenanigans could possibly happen, right? And I do that with everything because I mean, it's what we do. And it's weird to have that other appreciation because you don't really think of it. It just kind of happens one day, and you're like, oh wow, I'm thinking of this totally differently.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to it, right? So you play a game, you and I play a game, right? Let's say we just bought the new game for PS4, whatever it is, Death Stranding, doesn't matter. And we like what we consider to be like 75% of it, but we have 25% of it we think we could have done better, right? And that's every single gamer. Oh, well, they left this out. They shouldn't have left this out. They did this. They shouldn't have done that. And then you start to see how this really goes in development, right? Everybody thinks that every game is made with the same infinite budget, with the same infinite amount of time schedule, with the same artists, and it's really not even close to like that. It's totally the opposite. It's everything is under the gun of budget. It doesn't matter what level you're at. Some people say, well, I'm going to make a game myself so I don't have to answer to anyone. Great. Do you know how long that's going to take you? Unless you're going to make tic-tac-toe or Pong or something, good luck. Have fun. It is possible. Yeah.
And you're completely right about that, which is why the story of Axiom Verge was just always so fascinating to me.
That was a solo dev, right?
Solo dev, for anybody who doesn't know, this guy, I think his name was Tom Happ, for years.
And that was done in Game Maker Studio, I think.
I don't know, but I just know that
Pretty sure it was Game Maker.
He designed everything. He did the art. He did the programming. He did all of the music himself, and the soundtrack to that game is off the hook. I mean, it's
top-notch.
So good. And the game it's kind of like a Metroidvania, but it's got a lot of really, really fun differences from your standard. A lot of different weapons and the way it's just such a wacky, awesome, amazing, complete game. And then when you find out that this one dude just did it, I think he even did it in his spare time over a bunch of years.
Yeah,
it's amazing. But
well, there's another one too. I think, is it Hollow Knight? No, it's something I forget. It's not Hollow Knight. It's another game that was all solo dev. But a solo dev effort, if you want to do it, just be certain that unless the scope, and what I mean by scope is that, like, we're going to make a giant, massively multiplayer online game. If you think you're going to do that as a solo dev, it's a good time to get your head checked. It's not going to happen. You need not a giant team, but you need a big team to do an MMO of any kind. And even a game of any kind, it's going to take years. So this is one thing Brenda and I always like to talk about, the similarities and the differences between the music business, or the music composition and development, making of albums, whatever you want to talk about, and the comparison between game development. And a game, for instance, I would say the average cycle of any game that we see released now is a minimum of 2 years, right? But it's probably between 2 and 4, could be a little more. I don't think it's ever any less than 2 years, unless it's really a small thing, or something like Madden by EA, which is, first of all, it's I don't even know how many people. It's got to be 1,000 people that work on it, and they're only able to make so many changes because they have to release the game every year, right? So they have to streamline pieces of it, and it's a solo dev effort is a kind of a Herculean thing. And interestingly enough, on that subject, The other game that I started working on music for is actually a solo dev effort. If you exclude myself
Right.
and another composer that's working on the game. And that is a game called The Crimson Diamond. And that actually fits a lot more with the retro theme, because Empire of Sin from Romero Games is more, it's going to be like a modern game, right? It's kind of got a mixture of, it's a turn-based strategy, but it's got a mixture of kind of a SimCity feel to it. It's got some XCOM style combat, but there's a lot of elements that make it different. And I know for a fact this can be awesome. I'm excited to play it because XCOM is actually one of my all-time favorite games. I think I have it on the shelf behind me somewhere. But this is kind of the polar opposite. So the Crimson Diamond is based off if you know what a text parser is, and not only in text parser, but an EGA text parser.
Okay, I do not. So can you explain that to me?
Okay, so text parser is like the technical term for meaning you have to type words in order to make the game go.
Text adventure, or
it's kind of like a text adventure, but it's a graphical text adventure, right? So if you know, well, the most famous series probably is King's Quest,
right?
But there's some other ones here that are, well, we won't worry about those now. But King's Quest is the first four were all that style. Once they got to the fifth one, then they went to this point and click adventure style game. But I would say Sierra and LucasArts were the kings of the point and click adventure games. LucasArts, as I remember, didn't really have any text parsers. They were all like, they had like verbs, right? You could choose verbs and then you would push, pull, look. Games like Maniac Mansion or Monkey Island or Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, if you played that adventure game. I played all these games as a kid. Sierra was King's Quest, Space Quest, Quest for Glory, and those were all graphic text parsers, at least some of them in the series. And so the EGA art palette is what defines the style of how the game looked, right? So it was right before VGA graphics, which used a 256 color palette. EGA used a 16 color palette. So it's hard to imagine exactly what it looks like. I'm not a very good describer of these things because this is not my expertise.
If you have any like screenshots or anything, I can insert them into the YouTube video so people can see.
Absolutely. I have screenshots. I got video, all kinds of stuff.
I never really thought about it because the console homebrew scene is so, prevalent. There's so much stuff going on, but I guess has to be a retro PC homebrew scene going
Big time.
on. Yeah.
Big time, actually. And one of the guests at our expo 2 years ago, David Murray, the 8-bit guy, right. He made and released a big box PC game for DOS called Planet X3.
That's awesome.
I believe he also did the soundtrack. He may have had some assistance as well. Another friend of mine from the big box PC game chat group, a guy named Jim Leonard, also helped with programming some of that game and finishing up. He was helping finishing up that game. So Planet X3, David Murray, is pretty cool because he's doing exactly what you're talking about, and it's beneficial because he's a YouTuber, so people know him as that, and he has a nice platform to promote it. Now, what I will say about him is he made, as far as I understand it, he did not make money. He broke even, but he didn't make a profit. So that was like extreme labor of love. And I don't know him. I've never met him because sadly, I was on tour the year that he was at our expo. So hopefully we'll have him back. I didn't get to meet him. But there is a scene for it. And there is demand for it. Now, the interesting thing about this game is, even though it's in this style, it's actually being made in an adventure game studio, which is really probably one of the more accessible game making tools available, but obviously it's mostly for adventure games. this game, the Crimson Diamond, is being developed by a woman in Canada, in Toronto, Canada, by the name of Julia Minamata, and she is awesome. So I don't know how exactly we met, but I think we met through a mutual friend, probably going back to that big box PC chat again, by the name of Roberta Vaughn. Roberta's, hopefully we'll have her at our expo at some point, but she's a very important person in the PC scene and development scene. She actually works for the developers. They're now known as Trans Solar Games, but they were former game designers at Sierra, and Lori and Corey Cole are their names, and they're responsible for the Quest for Glory series, which is my favorite adventure game of all time, the first one anyway. So getting back to the Crimson Diamond in a really
roundabout
weird manner, yes. What we thought of was I was playing the game or playing the demo or something and listening to the music and saying to myself, well, this is a 1987 text parser styled after a Sierra game, really specific. If you want to get really specifically, it's styled after the Laura Bow adventure games, Colonel's Bequest, and then also later Dagger of Emin Ra. But I was like, okay, so the music's got to be kind of, they say MIDI style, right? If you had your computer back in 1988 and you had a PC, it's very unlikely that you had expensive sound hardware, or you may have not even had sound hardware at all, right, like besides the PC speaker going beep, 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 whatever. And while you can do some amazing stuff with a PC speaker, that's not really something I was super interested in doing. And I thought, what would make this game like super authentic and period correct and, just fit really perfect? And if I think you guys talked about it a couple podcasts ago with Brendan and the X68000, there's a sound module called the Roland MT32. And it's a MIDI box that Roland, who's a big keyboard, synth, drum, everything, all kind of manufacturer. Yeah, they make everything, and they're still in business today. Like, I still use their products on stage. I use a V-Synth GT, which is like a $3,000 whatever keyboard. But yeah, so they made this box in 1987. Initially, was designed to be kind of like, it was supposed to be like a home synth. It was supposed to be like for more the music enthusiast as opposed to somebody playing games. But Sierra, the company, decided to start using that box and supporting it directly. There was some talk, another famous game designer, Al Lowe. You probably know the game series Leisure Suit Larry. He's responsible for creating that series. He actually was kind of an important guy at Sierra. He wasn't like the top guy or whatever, but he was one of the more important guys there. And he actually talks, there's a video of him at DragonCon talking about how the relationship between Roland and Sierra was Sierra was actually trying to get Roland to package the MT32 with their games. Now, in 1987, I think the device was like $700. So who was buying a music specifically just to play songs from a game for $700? Not many people. No. But with the explosion of the retro scene, now people are going back and buying those boxes and saying, how is this game really supposed to sound? And if you ever hear like FM synthesis or OPL chip synthesis that's like built into most even cheap sound cards, that's probably what you remember the PC sounding like, or the PC speaker. And both of those, to me, the PC speaker, again, you have some cool, unique things it does. The OPL chip and the FM synth is cool. But if you hear I think the shining example is Space Quest 3. If you hear the difference between those different soundtracks using different devices, the MT32, it's like, I heard it for the first time and I was like, oh my God, what in the world is this? That's what this sounded like? I can only imagine the experience I would have had in 1980. Well, it would have been, what, 89? I think that came out 88, 89. So anyway, long story short, we decided that the soundtrack had to be MT32. It has to be an MT32 soundtrack. Now, sadly, Adventure Game Studio, the current version or the last couple versions, don't support MS-DOS anymore. So it's going to be a game that's really only playable by not modern, super modern PCs, but the modern PC. Like, you're going to probably need Windows XP or Windows 7 or 10 or whatever, or Mac.
Not DOS
to play it. No, it won't. As of now, we won't run in DOS, and I don't see there becoming a budget or anything to get that ported to DOS at this point. So.
Well.
But the MT32 soundtrack, it just fits the period perfectly, and it kind of frames the game. To me, it puts it right in the exact window of time that it's supposed to be in. Yeah.
George and I talked last episode about very briefly on audio chips and then speakers, and how I think that overall retro gaming does not I think a lot of people do the audio a disservice, because a lot of times everybody had all this stuff going through tiny little crappy speakers or TV speaker, and
I did. I remember hearing this. You were talking about plugging into the headphone on the Genesis, for example.
Right. I'd like to do a whole episode on different PC and console sound chips and everything, but
you won't be able to do one that's 20 episodes.
Maybe a very, very condensed one. But so tell me about like your process here. So Brenda or Julia, they come up to you, and do they, like, how do they communicate what they need? Because do they just say, Dan, this is kind of the scene, this is the feeling we're going for, and you kind of like,
so how everybody is completely different, right? And I've been working with artists for a long period of time, like in the studio, on stage, whatever. So I kind of understand how their processes go or can be different. So each one is different, right? Ellie Gouldling will want one thing. Sean Paul will want another thing. Fabulous will want another thing. Whoever it is, they all have different wants and needs in terms of what they want to hear, the tracks that they like. Because if you're working in the studio and you bring a song, like this happens to me all the time in my career, they say, oh, dude, I have this track. It'd be great for Sean Paul. Okay, let me hear it. I listen to it. I'm like, yeah, which Sean Paul? Not the one I know. But, I mean, you have to be nice and respectful and listen to their music, whatever. So you have to really just understand their process. So this kind of gets into the music side of things, but a great composer, music producer, it's really a music producer, which is kind of slightly a lost art nowadays. If you're making a song for an artist, you take all their previous stuff and you digest it and you listen to it. And you then, create something for them that is in line or in lane with what they've done. So with a game, it's a little different because you can't really do that as much. But I can respect their process. So when I'm talking to John Romero, I better be cognizant of the fact this guy's been doing it since before I was born, number one. He's been at the top of the game forever. So I'm just going to trust that he knows his process and try to deliver as best I can. So if he mentions the name of a composer, I'm going to go listen to everything. If he mentions another game, I'm going to go listen to everything with that game. If he mentions anything, for Jean, anything that guy, or Brenda for that matter, anything they say, I'm going to take to heart. If they send me a newspaper article, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to read articles that are similar. So I'm trying to get into their head, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a creative process. And even worse, if the song has no lyrics, there's nothing, we can't actually communicate with words how it works, right? We just hear it and it works or it doesn't. Sing me the lyrics to the Sonic the Hedgehog theme song. Are there any? Probably
Uh,
somebody wrote them.
I was at a convention recently and they were playing what I think was from the Sonic cartoon because it had lyrics
The
and
cartoon,
it had
yeah.
this guitar. It was ridiculous.
And it's cheesy.
Yeah, oh yeah, but I know what you're talking about. There are no lyrics, obviously.
Yeah, so you really have to kind of use your imagination and your skills, your compositional skills. So thankfully, a lot of that artist stuff and me just thinking about this all the time prepared me for it. And now John and Brenda have been doing this for a long time. They're veteran game designers. I'm going to listen to whatever the hell they say and just take their word for it and just trust that they know the process. And at the same time, understand that not everybody I work with is going to be on that level. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? So you work with the best, the top people, veterans who've been doing it forever. You have to be cognizant of the fact that not everybody is going to be like that. That doesn't mean they're not good. It just means they don't have that level. They don't have that resume, that level of experience.
So like, say Brenda and John, do they like communicate very well what they're looking for? Like, how much of it is them telling you what they want and you kind of getting the vibe and creating what you
Right. So I don't know how much of that I can go into without,
yeah,
upsetting the apple cart there. But I could talk more about the game with Julia because the music's already out, the demo's already
right.
out. So Julia's the opposite, right? She's never released a game before. I oddly, I think the thing that made me really want to work with her was one of the interviews she did on with one of the YouTubers. I think it was Matt Barton. Matt Chat is his channel. He's really interesting. He's a really good interviewer, Matt. But she said some stuff, and I said, "Wait a second. The only way this girl's able to speak like that is if she's an actual game designer. But she's telling me she's not. She's never worked on a game before. But I heard her speak, and I was like, nope, that's a game designer. This is easy. I want to be a part of this." And we talked about it, and it was me kind of leading the charge in terms of it because she said, I don't really have a lot of experience in this way. I'm not really, I don't really know music like that. She's an artist by trade, right? So she can draw, she can do digital art, whatever, and animate. And she was more like, well, yeah, I'm going to trust you to do this, right? So I would never expect John Romero to say that to me, knowing full well that I'd never worked on a video game before,
Right.
which they knew. Of course, they knew. I wasn't lying to them or anything like that. I didn't trick them into getting the job. I basically just told them, here's what I do, and they know. But with Julia, it was more like, okay, now it's my responsibility to do more leading here and do more of that kind of aspect. So I would say I've already, in only 2 games, have seen both ends of the spectrum. Yeah. Solo dev, brand new, industry vets, not a AAA studio quite probably, but maybe what I think some people refer to it as a III studio. A number of people, obviously well-respected vets and whatever. So with Julia's game, I was able to decide a little bit more, and try to influence it more. So I almost feel like, I don't think it's better. I just think it's just a different process.
Yeah. It's situational. I mean, a good example of this is you created the theme for this podcast. And
right.
When we were talking, I'm like, Dan, I think you offered, you said, I can create something. What are you looking for?
Yep.
And me, who has never instructed anyone to make a piece of music, who I play the drums a little bit, but I have zero musical understanding or ability. I think I used words like, well, I want something that's kind of like chill, but like kind of cool. And like, I mean, I was just trying to communicate the feeling.
Was it chill? I don't know if it's very chill.
But whatever I said, I was trying to communicate the feeling that I was thinking of in my head.
Right. Which is almost impossible.
Right.
It's tough.
It worked because you kind of made exactly what I had in my head.
Well, I think the tough part about that is it depends on who the person listening to your feedback is, right? Your input. I don't think that and I'm not trying to be, full of myself. I just have been doing this for a long time, and I've worked with people on every side of the spectrum, like total experts that know exactly what they want better than I can even think of in my head. And then somebody who's using words that don't even have any kind of context in the musical realm whatsoever. So you learn to translate that stuff. Right. So you're like, okay, you think about, and I mean, this all goes into my head, and I'm thinking about this even with Romero Games and Empire of Sin. I'm just kind of evaluating what I know about these people, right? Like, what do I know about them? What do I know about their experience? You too. So like, what do I know about Joel? What do I know? I know he's an NES guy. So, okay, cool. I know he's a Genesis guy too. I know he's a Turbo guy, to an extent. Like, I know you're aware of these and you've spent time in those realms, right? You've spent a lot of time diving deeper. You don't just know, like, I don't know that I would consider, and maybe this is wrong, I don't know that I would call you a PS4 guy, but I could be wrong about
I'm not really. I have one.
There you go. Right, you have one. I have one too, and it's cool. It's the Star Wars one, and it sits there most of the time.
I love when I get a new game and I put it on and I can play it like next week after it finishes updating.
Right.
My favorite thing ever.
Well, that's another joke entirely. But these are all these are all things to consider, and they have to go. Anybody that's going to get future work should be considering things like this. Right. So Julia was the same thing. And I thought about it, and I went back and forth with MT32 because I knew it was going to be using MIDI of some kind and having an older sound. But at first I was like, oh yeah, I can just throw a bunch of MIDI boxes together, use some software synthesizers, it'll be fine. And as I thought about it more and more, I'm like, dude, you can't do that. That's like, no. Slap yourself. You're absolutely not doing that. No, it has to be an MT32. And do you own an MT32? No. Okay. Well, is there any software you can use? Yeah, there's some. Okay. Do you know how to do it? No, I have no clue. Okay. It's a pain. The MT32 is a real pain. So there's two boxes, right? Not two boxes. There's many boxes, but there's two that kind of built on each other. The Roland MT32 predates this standard called General MIDI. And I don't want to get too deep into this either. But it doesn't use this standard, and this standard is still being used today. Mm-hmm. So you could buy like a Casio keyboard at Costco, and it would still be compatible with General MIDI. The Roland MT32 doesn't use that. So the librarian software that I have to use to get sounds out of that thing, I'm running DOSBox on my PC with Windows 3.1 and a librarian software called LA Synth Editor, which I have to shout out my buddy Brandon Bloom, who's also a video game composer, who helped me do all these things, because the hell am I going to use software from 1989, 1990, Windows 3.1? Who wants to do all that? Nobody. But if you do it and it's authentic, it really works, so.
Yeah, but tell me it's not even just a little bit fun.
Oh, it's great fun. I mean, it's really fun to compose, but the process sometimes of getting what's in your head to the computer is a problem, right? So I spent years learning this software called Pro Tools, which is like, mostly you would use it to mix audio, either albums or movies, or all the professional studios for the most part are using Pro Tools, right? And I spent years learning it and understanding it. And you don't need to use dated things like the 1987 Roland MT32 anymore, because we have stuff that sounds way better.
Right.
Well, we do, but we have stuff that sounds way better, but that NES sound chip sounds really cool. And, the Amiga 500 even sounds really good, even though it doesn't have a built-in synth. And the Apple IIgs has a really cool synth chip built in, and the Commodore 64 has the SID chip. And even though we have new, better things, they're not always better, and they're not always as authentic. And you and I are retro knuckleheads, right? Nuts. we want authentic. If we wanted inauthentic, we'd have Raspberry Pi handhelds, and that's what we would do. That doesn't cut it for me.
And
I have nothing against it. It just doesn't work for me.
there's something that I like to talk about as much as possible when homebrew or programming of old stuff or any type of creative endeavor is creativity within limitations. So when you're
Yeah,
using older stuff and
absolutely.
you have a set, like a game like say Shovel Knight, which is an amazing game, 8-bit aesthetic, right? That wouldn't be possible because it's doing things that NES couldn't do. No knocks on it.
Right.
It's fantastic. But if someone's building a game for the NES, I mean, they have that set tool set, the set color palette and sprites on the screen. If you're doing audio, you have I don't know how the audio works, how many channels, but whatever they had.
I think it's 4,
Right.
but yeah, you might have access to more with the Famicom thing that you guys talked about in that
Yeah,
last podcast.
but even so, like so you got to get creative to.
It's very limited.
Right.
Yeah. And you're right. I think in that limitation, you can create some amazing stuff. And then, we're thinking about it now. How do we stretch it? But reality, these guys, the composers from back in the day, the Sierra guys, Ken Allen, Mark Siebert, there's a ton of. Al Lowe was one of the composers. He actually wrote the Leisure Suit Larry theme because I believe before that he was a school teacher and he played saxophone. He's like, when I'm meeting this guy 100%. I'm just going to meet him, and I want to play music with him at some point.
Cool.
Like I want to play the Leisure Suit Larry theme. But these guys were stretching that box, the MT32, even way back then. Like they were programming their own sounds. Like I have in the librarian, I have all their sounds. You can see like this is the sound effect from this in Space Quest 3. It's pretty awesome to be able to, just access it and see how far they stretched it. The flip side is now that we've gotten to a point with the technology that a lot of stuff we can make move way faster. It's going backwards is like, oh, I have to do all of this just to make this one little change, and I can't hear it in real time. Oh, brutal. So that's the one thing that's tough because I think the time limits have changed, right? In development earlier with music especially, it took way more time. Now, I can do an album. Like I tell this to people all the time. I can do an album in a week, maybe less. I might be able to do 2 in a week, depending on how much time is dedicated to it, right? Whereas, back in the day, that wouldn't really have been possible unless we just sat in there and recorded. But the advent of the technology and all these things that you can do. I mean, you got guys making songs that are on the radio that they made on their iPhone.
That's insane.
Right? Yeah. It's pretty nuts, and it's possible, but to now go back and do these authentic retro style things is interesting, which is, using DOSBox and, like I said, using DOSBox and Windows 3.1 to run librarian software. And I think back in the day, I can't be sure which software these guys were using to do the librarian stuff, but the box itself has no physical way of programming it. So you have to use some kind of software. The top one at the time was for Atari ST. So where am I going to get an Atari ST emulator or an Atari ST and run this particular software? It's not a game. It's not collected. It's not collectible software.
Right.
It's out there. It's available, but good Lord, man. And then I have to get it to talk to modern hardware because in DOSBox, I'm actually sending out of that Windows 3.1 a physical cable into the back of my MT32 to program. So it's literally physically being programmed between different eras of hardware. So it's ridiculous.
So if I understand this correctly, you're basically moonlighting as a audio mad scientist.
I'm the lowest level of mad scientist. Like I think if you want to study or learn about a real audio music mad scientist, there's a guy named George the Fat Man Sanger, and he's responsible for a lot of soundtracks from the 90s, 80s, late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s. He was kind of the guy for a while. He had a company called Team Fat, or a group, and he was literally the mad scientist. There's another great YouTube video of him on same channel, Matt Chat, and it's 2 or 3 episodes. And you can see how much of a mad scientist he is. I am way less the mad scientist. I want to move fast. Like, I think the podcast theme that we have now, I think I had it done maybe in an hour or 2 hours. Like, it doesn't take a lot. And the hour wasn't writing all the parts. It was editing out the stuff that needed to be fixed or moving things around, and then kind of mixing down the sound to get it, to really pop. It's the same kind of thing with the soundtrack for the Crimson Diamond. I mean, that's my process. Everybody's process is different.
Right.
Some people would sit with pen and paper, or they'd sit on a piano or a guitar or whatever, or sing it all first. I mean, but I do that. I mean, I would say my process starts in my head, right? So first, before I go to an instrument or a computer or whatever, I'm kind of really abstractly getting the idea in my head. Even for the podcast theme, it was kind of in my head that it should have some kind of element of NES, Genesis. I was thinking really Genesis and enough modern drum or elements to not, you guys were talking about this, right? It's how you thought it sounded, how you remember it sounded versus the way it actually sounded.
Yeah, we talked about visual fidelity.
Right. How you remember it. It looked a certain way. You're like, oh, it looked like this. No, it looked a lot worse. Oh, yeah, it did. But it works. So that was kind of the thing. So I wanted to be like, create the song where you think it could have played. If you're the average consumer, you think this song could have just played on a Genesis. And realistically, there's absolutely no way it could ever play on that. But it sounds kind of like it could or it should, right? So it's kind of the opposite with the Crimson Diamond. I had to use. I'm forcing myself to just limit. To those things. And you would do that depending on the game, depending on the request. Like, you see a lot, which is kind of cool too. You see a lot of guys cover music on YouTube where they do like the 8-bit Toto Africa, or they do like the theme, who knows, TV theme songs, modern shows. And
have you ever seen the Africa by Toto that was made in Mario Paint?
I did see it, I think.
That blew my freaking mind when I saw it.
There's a perfect example of what we're talking about, right? You have to use the limitations of, first of all, Mario Paint's not even really supposed to be a sequencer where you can make music in. It's supposed to be like painting and drawing, right?
Right. It's got that crazy audio tool, man.
But somebody tweaked it to be able to do that, And there's actually a really cool tool on Nintendo Switch called Chord. I think it's Chord Gadget. There's a couple of plugins, and they're giving you sounds from old games, so you can actually program.
Huh.
The Nintendo DS had it as well. There's 2 Korg video games. There's Korg DS10, and I think there's DS10 Plus. And they're actually not a game. They're synths.
Yeah, I think
they're
my
like
friend Mike
DS
had
cards.
those, and he would always be like screwing around with them.
Yeah, at some point I want to incorporate that into something somewhere, but there has to be a good reason to do it.
Right.
I can't just, do it. But that's the kind of stuff I enjoy, because it's like, oh, well, now you're incorporating this, and you have to toe that line, right? So with the MT32, although I'm using only the instruments that are available and whatever, the limitations of that hardware, I am tweaking the audio for the final output. I want it to sound clean, so I'm doing equalization, I'm doing limiting and compression. Light, very light. You don't really want to hear it, but it's enough to give you the sound of a modern game. Because if you listen to something, like a video game soundtrack from 1989, the standard of audio is way different, right? The standard of audio now in a video game is as good as any theatrical release film, right? And those are usually the largest audio budgets I would think of anyone on the planet, even much more than music. So you kind of have to understand that the listener's ear in 2019 has changed since 1989. And yes, you can make things that are totally authentic in this. So I wanted to just give it just enough to be accessible, and so you don't really think it's like, oh, that sounds bad.
But you're just touching it up a little bit.
Just touching it up. I'm not adding sounds that don't belong there or anything like that. I'm just maybe enhancing the bass a little bit, or just giving the low parts a little push volume wise. It's nothing major. It's nothing like like for example, you hear the podcast theme, you think, oh, this could have been done on the NES or the Genesis. There's not a chance in hell. I added a million other instruments. I added sub kicks that are, you could play it against a modern dubstep track and it wouldn't fall. Like the level of the audio, if you look at tracks like that, the level of the audio of a modern dubstep track is screaming, and this should be right about there. If you played it against the Genesis thing, it's going to sound like, somebody turned your volume down.
Right.
So there's little things like that. We have to make it as a composer living in 2019. I have to appreciate, especially if I want the majority of people to want to listen to what I'm doing, I have to appreciate where the average listener's ear is, right? And it's funny, I teach a class every Monday. It's mostly on music production and music composition. And I talk about this with them all the time. I say, guys, all of us in the class, we're all tainted. We can't be trusted for our musical opinions. We can't do that. We have to go ask somebody that has no experience, that doesn't understand it. We have to go ask the audience. We're not our own audience, right? We have to go find out from our audience how they're consuming it, how they're listening to it. If we're not, then we might as well just be making music in our bedrooms for ourselves, right? I mean, we're making, same thing with games. You're making games for people to play, ideally, and buy, even more importantly. If you want to be successful, if you want to have a prayer of making another game, I think that's something too that people don't realize big time. A lot of studios, they may release a game and that might be it, because they've now run out of money. They don't have a chance to make another game as a studio. Maybe they get a job as a developer somewhere else. Maybe they completely move on in their career. But that happens a lot. And I mean, I think that happens more than it doesn't.
So many games being released now, like all over the place. It's very easy for probably a good game to fall to the wayside and not really get attention.
Absolutely. And I think that's a whole nother story. That's the marketing side of things. But yeah, I mean, like how you're making a game now in 2019 styled after a 1988 game where you have to type, and you can't play it on your phone, and you can't play it on retro hardware, and it's limited release. Well, how do you find an audience for this? It's tough.
Yeah.
And you have to do, that's why I feel like the MT32 to me is as amazing as it is. It's also a marketing point. It's important to say, this is made on the Roland MT32. We wanted it to be period correct music. However, the music is composed 2018, 19, 20, whatever. So, it's important to take all these things into account. It's a lot of juggling, really, that you're doing. Just making something as simple as a podcast song, a theme for this, depending on how good you are. Some people, or experienced you are, some people, they just throw a couple loops together in GarageBand and it sounds great. Generally, that's not what happens, but it can, so there's a lot of ways to do it, but your experience level will dictate what your capabilities are, right? Like if you ask the average person that does music to work with a 1987 box, they're going to tell you, get lost, or they're going to try to charge you millions of dollars, which people making retro styled games just generally are not making.
Yeah.
Right. It's not, I mean, the vast majority, all the homebrew stuff, I'd be surprised if any of them are turning like even reasonable profits.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in the homebrew scene has definitely gotten rich. And
not absolutely not. And you think
I hope
about
they've
it,
at least broken even, because some of the games have been so good that have come out.
I mean, broken even, but breaking even is really losing money.
Right, because you put all the time in.
You spent 2-3 years of your life. Imagine, okay, hey, listen, we need you to work at Walmart for the next 3 years of your life, to accomplish something. But by the way, you're not going to get paid. Who's going to do that? You're not even going to go for one day.
Yep.
Or you're going to go for one day until you realize that nobody's paying you, and you're never going again. I mean, that's kind of the reality of it. So and it's a sad reality. With the technology and the ease of making the games, the flip side is, there's so many of them being made. How do you find a space? But that's a way bigger discussion way bigger than I'm qualified to answer, for sure.
And that's not even talking about the emotional toll that if you're making a
Oh
game and
God.
the art aspect and you're putting yourself into that, and then if it doesn't work out or if it's poorly received, and I mean, I can speak of this with experience. When you get deep into something that you're trying to do, a lot of times you get lost in it and it's hard to see outside of it. So,
Definitely.
then when it gets released out there to the wild, if something didn't work the way you thought it did or whatever, and it affects you a lot emotionally. And I can only imagine someone who puts years into something, releases it, either it bombs or it sucks or something happens that it's great, and for whatever reason it doesn't get attention, sales. And this is video games, music, writing, whatever it is. I mean, to say demotivating is probably not even.
It's understating. Yeah. And guess what? Even the successful ones are like that. Like, I can tell you, and this I don't think is under any NDA or whatever. I can tell you, it takes every bit of life force out of these people that are making these games. Whether it's at a company in Ireland or in a solo dev in Toronto, it is literally taxing their life. Like, that's just not an exaggeration. It absolutely is, because it's a process, it's a period of years. And I don't even want to know how many hours Brenda works a day, but it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. She doesn't sleep. She survives off coffee.
I mean, from a much, lesser perspective, I understand that from the expo side, because, it's a presentation, it's a show. And I never really understood, like when a team wins the Super Bowl and everyone's like going crazy and everyone's happy except the coach, because the coach is already thinking about next year.
The draft or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he's enjoying it that night, but you're only as good as your last win.
You're only as good as your last win. And man, once you get the game out there, even if, like you said, even if it's a huge hit, well, that life that you've now known for the past 2, 3, 4 years is done. So either that game sold well enough for you to make another one, or you've already got one that you're pitched, that is already in development. Your company has more than one game you're working on, or it's a total failure and you just don't even want to have anything to do with it anymore. And let's talk about this too. If you are a good programmer, from what I understand, the money you would make in games versus the money you would make in just regular software development is like this. Like, games don't really pay like that.
Yeah.
So you would be much better off making, whatever, some software that's quote unquote boring, but that's, what can actually support you as a person, and you have reasonable hours, and these, the games have something called crunch. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah.
And software, I'm sure, has it too. But crunch is not good. I haven't personally experienced it, but we have things like that on tour. When we're on tour and we're playing in one city that night, and we're playing in another city the following night, and the distance that you have to travel to get to those cities is ridiculous. Like, if you're flying across Australia, for example, I've done stuff like this. You're on one end of Australia, which is I think it's almost the same size, or is the same size as flying across the US. So you do the show in the next day you have another show on the other side of the country, which means you have to, and your shows are late, right? So let's say your show ends at midnight. Your flight leaves at 7 in the morning. So you're flying. When are you supposed to sleep and rest between the time you arrive and then you have to go to sound check? You got to check into your new hotel. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then, by the way, you got another gig the next day, so you also have to fly again. That happens to me constantly, and we don't. It happens all the time. Flying is tough, but the same. There's a similarity there with the games where the game has to get out at the end of the month, right? Okay, but we're only 98% done, and it's going to take us whatever. I'm using a bad analogy, but it's going to take us a long time. It's got to get done. We that's it. Our funding is done. The publisher is demanding it this day, and if we don't make it, they're not putting in one more penny, and we're all going to be out on the street, and we won't have released the game. Even worse, right? And that happens too. Sometimes you see that. You see games that are released and probably shouldn't have been released yet. Now it's worse because you have big companies that can just release games and then fix them on the fly, which is
that's a whole nother
but it also happened back in the day where they couldn't fix them on the fly and they just released them,
right?
That happens a lot too. So I've found a new appreciation in game design, I guess. And I like I said, I'm no game designer or programmer or anything, but I have an appreciation for the people doing it. They're basically all a labor of love. It's unbelievable what they're being. It's similar to music. You're not doing it because you want to get rich. You're doing it because you just can't do anything else. You wouldn't want to do anything else.
I'm really looking forward to seeing your journey in the game design world, and just kind of spectating and seeing what happens, because I'm interested in it, and it's cool that somebody that I know is now in the trenches on the other side of the controller.
I want to be on both sides. I want to stay on both sides because I enjoy playing games, and I don't know that I could spend 2 years working on one game.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that I have that in me. I got way too much, attention deficit or whatever. The music is good for that.
You'd be surprised though if you really get passionate about something. I mean, I'm sure this. Like, you'd be surprised at what happens when, what you end up doing for things that you're like, I really, really want this to get this X result, or I feel really strongly about Y, and now it does not a time thing. After that, you just go.
Well, I think that's what got me into music in the first place. I don't think I would have had a shot. I started working on my career really at 6 years old. How many people start their careers when they're 6? Some people do. Some people do, but not a lot. Dancers, sure. Actors, probably. Some of them do. Musicians, for sure. I mean, they all start, for the most part, they all start young, so it's something I've been doing forever. Brenda was doing it since she was a little kid. She was designing games. There's plenty of interviews and all over that you can watch with her. Dude, this is one thing. Anybody watching this, go watch them. Like, go watch some of their interviews. They're amazing. I watch all of them. I'm a fan. Just, I know them. I work for them, whatever, but I'm still a fan of theirs. I'm a fan of Julia's. I watch her interviews. Like, what is she going to say? I want to know. I want to know their process. I want to know what they're thinking about. Like, I still at some point want to sit down with Brenda or John or both and ask them, what are you thinking about when you play a new game? I want to know what your thought process is when you play this new game. What are you thinking about? Because they're thinking about it from a design perspective. They're thinking about it, I'm going to make this, or I'm going to make something like this, or I'm never going to make anything like this. Well, I want to know about that. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm fairly certain. I don't think they spend 3 months playing Metal Gear Solid 5, right? They might spend years playing it, but small periods of time.
I wonder if
they're not 8 hours a day binging games for 2 weeks.
I wonder if they'd be interested in coming on the podcast one day.
I'm sure if they have the time, they would absolutely love to. because I know they would love to come out to New York at some point, because Brenda's actually from here. She's from upstate, and John is not. John's a West Coaster. I think he's Cali, but they're like, they're some of the nicest people, and like I owe them a lot, in my opinion. Just the mentorship alone that I never expected. That's been amazing. So
in my head, I when I think about when they came to the show in Nottingham, I think of them looking out and seeing the stage and all the equipment and the whole to do, and then saying, "Wow, this is so cool," and then you looking at them being like, "Oh my God, this is so cool."
I think that's exactly what happened. My friend Joe describes it. He's like, "Can you imagine? The kids come, and their parents are Brenda and John, and they think you're the coolest guy in the room." And I'm like, wow, I never thought of that. Yeah. I'm like, dude, it was great, man. It was great to have people. First of all, it's great to have people when I'm on tour anyway, because most of the places we go with Sean, we don't really perform much in the country. So I almost don't know people anywhere. Like, I was just in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. I didn't know anybody in Riyadh, but had someone been there, it would have been great, because, it's like, oh, my friends get to see the show.
Yeah.
We'll go back to Australia, I think, at the beginning of the year, 2020, New Zealand. And I don't really know people over there. I mean, I know people who are from there, but I don't know who's going to be there at the time that we are, So I guess the other cool thing about that is, though, I have a remote studio. So everything I can do, pretty much, other than MT32 stuff, in my studio, I can do on the road. So Empire of Sin, the music that I've done so far, has been composed in many countries already. Guatemala, Europe, all over Europe. I think we were in Scotland, the UK. Where else were we? I don't even remember. We're all over all the time.
You got to stay busy.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, that's kind of a cool thing, So I can say, well, your game, I worked on your game in like 7 countries. Like, not many people could say that, I don't think.
Yeah. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Well, dude,
except the country that you guys are making the game in.
Right. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. Let's just give some plugs here.
Definitely.
So Dan is currently working on the Crimson Diamond by Julia Minamata. And we will have links in the description, so you guys can check out where she is at so far. Dan is also
the demo's actually playable on Steam. You can download it for free.
Okay, cool.
And my theme song is like the first thing you hear at the beginning of the game.
Cool. So
it's pretty cool.
We will link to that.
Yeah.
He is also working on Empire of Sin by Romero Games. That is currently set to come out next year.
It's spring 2020 is the tentative.
Close.
Yep. You can look on Paradox Interactive's website. They're the publisher of the game. Romero's the developer, and they'll have probably the most up-to-date information over anybody other than me sharing it every once in a while. But yeah, the Paradox Interactive Twitter or their Facebook page, that'll be updated first.
Okay, cool. And we'll link to that. You can also see Dan if you go see a Sean Paul show. He will be slapping the keys. And you can also finally see him as the PC gaming coordinator for the Long Island Retro Gaming Expo.
Yeah.
It's something that we were going to get into. We ran out of time, so we're just going to have to do another show about the wacky adventures of Dan and PC Land.
No problem. No, that's a good time. That's a really good time. Hopefully we can have Anatoly or somebody on with us.
Oh yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great. Well, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you again.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Yeah. Definitely.
We'll catch you next time, guys. Take care. All right, cool.
Nice.